Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to give it a minute or two to let folks log on, and then we'll get started with today's presentations. To everyone just logging on now, we're going to give it another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'll just have some quick housekeeping, and then we'll get started with the presentations. All right, I'm seeing 12:02, and it seems like the number of folks joining is starting to taper off, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you, everyone, for joining. My name's Anna Stockstad. I'm an extension forester with the University of Minnesota, but today I'm wearing my MinWin hat. I'm on the executive committee of the Minnesota Women's Woodland Network, and I'm hosting this summer's webinar series. So thank you all for taking the time over your lunch hour to join this webinar series. So as some of you may be aware, you might have logged into previous webinars in this series over the summer. And this is actually the last part of our webinar series is our, keep trying to say episode, but that's not correct. This is our last webinar in the series today for the 2024 season. But all of the recordings of these webinars are posted on the MinWin website, which is linked here under the resources tab. So feel free to go and watch back any of those webinars or forward those on to any of your colleagues, etc. And then also, if you'd like to stay up to date with potential offerings in this webinar series next year, please feel free to reach out and we can add you to a mailing list so that you get invited to those webinars when we host them again in 2025. And so just some quick housekeeping related to Zoom. So we're going to answer all of the questions today at the end of the webinar. We have 2 speakers, but please feel free to submit those questions at any time during today's webinar using that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And like I said, we'll answer those at the end of the webinar today. And you can also send a chat directly to the host, me, and the panelists as well if you have any other questions as well. And so this is going to be recorded and it'll be sent out via email after today's webinar and again posted on that MinWin website under the resources tab. So that's all the housekeeping I have. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speakers. So first we have Jennifer Teagarden. She is the Forestry Incentives Coordinator with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and she is a former MinWin board member. And then second, we have Callie Birch from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. She is the state forester for Minnesota, and she's going to be presenting on NRCS programs. She'll be joining us about 15 minutes, or in about 15 minutes, but we're going to get started with Jennifer first. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and you can go ahead and take over.
Are you seeing, I'm clicking on share screen. Are you seeing, you're not seeing my screen yet?
I'm not seeing anything, no.
It's not letting me share.
Oh, shoot. 1 second.
Or unless I'm missing it. Give me a second.
You should be able to share your screen.
Oh, so yeah, I'm not getting any, I don't know if I should come back. When I'm clicking on the share screen, I'm not getting like notification to select a screen.
Is it saying that you don't have access?
No, it's just not working.
Okay, do you maybe want to try logging out and then logging back in and we
Yes,
can try again?
I'll come back and do that.
All right. Sorry, folks, just 1 minute. All right, now we can see your slides.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
So, hi again. I'm Jennifer Teagarden, the Forestry Incentive Coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. And I've been in this position for almost 2 years. And so I coordinate programs that provide incentives to woodland owners. And that includes most of my work is done with coordinating the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program and cost share for woodland owners. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today. And the three programs I'll talk about is the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program, 2C Managed Forest, and cost share for woodland owners. So the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program, it provides landowners with annual incentive payments, and the purpose of it is to keep forests as forests. And the one thing that when I talk to people about, the difference between the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program and 2C Managed Forest is that payments that people receive for the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program is considered taxable income. So you have to report it every year on your taxes. So eligibility for, and I'm sorry, I have to read off my screen over this direction, to enroll in 2C, or sorry, into SFIA. And so you have to meet all these requirements is you need to have 20 contiguous eligible acres of land. And it could be over 2 parcels as long as the 2 parcels touch each other and the acres are touching each other. And then of which of those 20 contiguous acres, half needs to be forested. And so the definition of law of forest land is it's 10% stocked with trees and shrubs. So that would allow you to enroll at a minimum 10 acres of forest, and then you could have another 10 acres of open land to have the 20 contiguous acres. The other thing you need is a registered woodland stewardship plan that is less than 10 years old and covers all the land being enrolled in SFIA. And so before you want to apply for the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program, you need to have a woodland stewardship plan registered with the DNR. And then to continue to receive payments, you have to have your plan updated every 10 years. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to record a covenant, an SFIA covenant, at the county recorder's office. And there are 3 different covenant lengths. There's an 8-year covenant, a 20-year covenant, and a 50-year covenant. And so that's the minimum amount of time that you're going to be in the program. You receive a higher payment rate for the 50-year covenant versus the 20 or the 8-year covenant. And all these, the next thing you need is you need to submit an SFIA application to the Department of Revenue. And applications are due October 31st of each year to be eligible for payment the following year. And so you can download the SFIA application and covenant from the Department of Revenue's SFIA website. And the covenant actually has 2 parts to it. There's what's called Exhibit A, where you list the parcel, legal description of the parcels that you're going to enroll into the program, and then Exhibit B, which has a map. And usually, oftentimes, the person who writes your woodland stewardship plan can work with you to develop a covenant. The other requirements for SFIA is your land cannot be enrolled into certain other programs like 2C Managed Forest Land, Reinvest in Minnesota, the RIM easements, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, Conservation Reserve Program or CRP, Green Acres, Agricultural Preserves, and Rural Preserves. And so if you try to apply for SFIA and you have those programs, then you'll get denied. The other thing I'd like to talk to people about before they enroll in SFIA is that covenants are perpetual, meaning they don't expire. So even though you have an 8-year covenant, the covenant remains on the deed of the property after 8 years. And I will talk about how to get covenants removed in a little bit. And so the covenant lists restrictions that are conditions for entrance into the SFIA program and must be followed to receive annual incentive payments. So that mainly it says that you're not going to develop on land that's enrolled in the SFIA program, or you're not going to change the use of the land, for example, from forest to agriculture. You're not going to build a tower on the land. So it specifies what you need to do in order to continue to receive payment for the program. And the other thing about covenants is if you sell your land that's enrolled in the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program, the covenant stays on the deed of the property. It's associated with the deed of the property, not with the landowner. And so if you sell or transfer the land remains in SFIA. So each year, the Department of Revenue issues SFIA payment based on how many acres you have enrolled in the program, and they issue the payments in October. And to make sure that you're able to receive payment, again, you have to follow the restrictions listed in the covenant. And if you, for example, build on land enrolled in SFIA, that parcel will then be under violation and you could be subject to fines by the Department of Revenue. And that could include paying back all your incentive payments plus interest, and then also paying a fine of up to 30% of the new market value of the parcel. Every May, the Department of Revenue sends out what's called the annual certification form and woodland stewardship activity report, and you need to have those postmarked in the mail by July 1st. And then again, you have to have a current woodland stewardship plan as of July 1st of that year. Just a few other things about ineligible land. There's a lot of what makes their land that's not eligible, but I'm going to just kind of go over some what you should be concerned about. So tax exempt land, some counties, for example, like Pine County, they have tax exempt wetlands, so that land would not be eligible for SFIA. Non-valued land, and that's often some counties assess road right-of-ways as non-valued, so that's not eligible. And then, of course, land used for agricultural purposes. And just so you know, unharvested food plots are not considered agriculture and is eligible for SFIA. It's just once you start, so you might have a food plot where you grow corn or hay. You can have that in SFIA. You just can't remove any of the product from the land. Few other things to make sure you know about that's not eligible for SFIA are structures that are not minor or ancillary. So the Department of Revenue has defined a minor ancillary structure as a primitive structure such as a shed. It could be maybe a garage, and they kind of the threshold for what is considered, when do I need to have an exclusion for my structure and when do I not? There's kind of some wiggle or gray area, but if you're going to live in the building, if it's going to have electricity, if it's going to have water, it's going to have septic, you need to have a 3-acre exclusion for a structure. But if the structure is just a garage that is used exclusively for forest management purposes, meaning you store the equipment that you use to do forest management purposes in it, then you don't need a 3-acre exclusion. And so sometimes you could have a structure like a garage that's over 300 square feet without a 3-acre exclusion, but it again has to be solely used for forest management purposes. And one thing that I like to talk to people about is when you do enroll in SFIA and you think I'm going to develop eventually on this land, but I'm not now, you want to make sure you have 3 acres excluded on your covenant where you're going to build. Otherwise, if you don't exclude 3 acres, then if you do build, you would be in violation. So withdrawing from SFIA, the way the law is written, you're able to request to withdraw from SFIA when you're halfway through the length of the covenant. So if it was an 8-year, you could request on year 4, 10, 20-year, you could request on year 20, 20-year, you request on year 10. And if it was a 50-year, you would request on year 25. Then you would have to wait another half the length of the covenant before the covenant would be released by the Department of Revenue. So that means you're locked in for 8, 20, or 50 years. Now, the other ways you can withdraw from SFIA is you can request to withdraw anytime prior to receiving your first SFIA payment. And once you receive your first SFIA payment, then again, you have to go through what's in the law stating the certain times that you can request to withdraw. The other way you're able to withdraw from SFIA is you enroll in a conservation easement that is as or more restrictive than SFIA. So an example of a conservation easement that you might roll into would be Reinvest in Minnesota, Forest Legacy, and then the DNR would provide you a covenant release if you did that. The final way to withdraw from SFIA is, and this is one of the only ways other than going into a conservation easement that you can get out before your covenant or before the 8, 20, or 50 years is there is what's called the death clause. And so if a claimant is enrolled in SFIA, or someone, we call them claimants, and they pass away, their heirs can request to withdraw from SFIA if they do so within 1 year of death of the person that was enrolled. However, some people enroll their parcels under a business, and if the business owner passed away, the heirs can't request to be withdraw from SFIA because the Department of Revenue considers that businesses can't die. And so if the death clause does not apply if you have land enrolled under a business or an LLC. So again, SFIA, there's a lot of, you have to understand a lot about the law and what your restrictions are and what potential violations or fines you might get by enrolling. There's another incentive program in Minnesota called 2C Managed Forests, and it's a tax classification, and that reduces your property tax to 0.65%. And again, there are some requirements. You need a minimum of 20 acres of contiguous parcels of forest land that is not used for agriculture. And in this case, and for SFIA, in SFIA, what I just talked about, you're required to remove 3 acres for a structure, but in 2C, you're required to remove 10 acres around a structure. So if you had a 40-acre parcel and it had a structure on it, then you would have up to 30 eligible acres that you could enroll into 2C. You also have to have a registered woodland stewardship plan that is less than 10 years old and covers all the land being enrolled in 2C. 2C applications are submitted to the county assessor by May 1st for taxes payable the following year. And again, when you apply, you must have a valid woodland stewardship plan. And finally, the land cannot be used for agriculture. There's certain programs you cannot be in to enroll in 2C. And so you can't be in the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act program. So you either have to choose SFIA or 2C. The other ones are Reinvest in Minnesota, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, Conservation Reserve Program, and Green Acres. You cannot, or the most you can have enrolled in 2C is 1,920 acres. And that's per taxpayer. So someone could have 1,920 acres registered under their name, and then they could have another 1,920 acres under, for example, a business. Sometimes I talk to people about like what's the difference between 2C and SFIA, and one, I say, well, first you got to remember that SFIA, you're locked in for 8, 20, or 50 years. 2C, you can get in and out of 2C very easily as long as you meet the dates that are required for changing your tax classification by your county assessor. And then, SFIA, again, your incentive payment is taxable. While 2C, you are receiving a reduced property tax rate of 0.65%. I'm going to switch to the DNR's PFM cost share program. And so there's state law allows the DNR to provide cost share to non-industrial owners of less than 5,000 acres for conservation purposes. And the law states we cannot exceed 75% of the actual cost of the conservation practice. And so what does that mean? So I set rates for different practices. And so currently right now, the rate to purchase and plant one softwood cheap softwood seedling is 69 cents. That's what you would be reimbursed at. And so I set a rate, and then you get a percentage of that rate once you complete the work. So rates vary from 50 to 75%. Although I'm going to say we have one cost share program where you get 100% reimbursement of the rate I set, and that's for drought-killed seedlings. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So typical projects range from 3 to 20 acres, but could be smaller, could be bigger. The landowner works with a DNR forester to develop a project plan. And so what I tell people is you call up the forester and you let them know what you want to do. The forester then decides if your project would be a good fit for the DNR's cost share program. They only have a set amount of money each year that they can spend. And so, they would say, how is this project going to help improve the landscape? Landowners, so you'd call a forester up, they would come out, they would write a project plan, and then there's a bunch of steps that eventually the project has to be encumbered, and then the forester will let you know you can start the work. So you could hire someone to do the work. And then once you complete the work, you would call the forester back, say, I'm done with the work, and they would come out and inspect the project. And for example, if you only completed 75% of the project, that's what you would be reimbursed for, 75% of what you originally would have been reimbursed for. And so you receive your reimbursement after completing the work. And again, the forester prioritizes projects based on local landscape level goals. I'm just going to go over some of the eligible practices. One that we are currently cost sharing at 75% of the rate I set is for reforestation and afforestation. So either you want to convert open land into a forest, or maybe you had a harvest and you need to replant, or you just want to underplant in areas. And so we have cost share so that you could prepare the site for planting and or seeding, planting trees and shrubs, and they need to be native trees and shrubs, seedlings. We also have money if you wanted to seed an area, and then funding to help reduce competition. And so that is one where that's a lot of what our cost share goes into is reforestation and afforestation. Other ones is to help improve the quality of the forest. So that could be thinning a stand, releasing seedlings and trees, and pruning trees. Another one is forest health. And for that, that would be controlling invasive species, protecting seedlings, for example, from deer browse, and controlling pests. Now, regarding controlling pests and controlling invasives, if it's a very prevalent pest or invasive in an area, we might not cost share it because you would control it on your land, but all the land around you still has these pests or invasive species. And so usually that kind of money goes to where those invasive species and pests are kind of on the newly introduced into an area. We also have one for helping with establishing wildlife habitat. And so that could be establishing permanent grass and forbs. So if you wanted to do a prairie opening, that would be an eligible practice. Managing brushland. For example, if you had a lot of buckthorn and you're on the forefront of where buckthorn is and hasn't been established, we actually have funding for goats to control buckthorn, and then for creating wildlife openings and structures. So we don't fund food plots, but we will fund creating wildlife openings and planting fruiting shrubs in them. Then we also have money for forest management, such as if rehabbing forest roads or skid trails. That's a great way to try to keep erosion down. And then we have funding to stabilize stream banks using sprout clumps, dormant stubs, or installing trees. Another category of cost share is to help improve your recreation or use of your woods. So that could be done by pruning or removing trees and constructing or improving paths and trails. We have money to help you prepare for a timber harvest by constructing roads or prepping a site for natural regeneration. Maybe you need to underplant before you do the harvest, so we have funding for that. And then finally, right now, we have a lot of funding to help replace seedlings killed by drought. So if you planted a seedling and it died within 5 years of planting because of drought, then we have money to help you replace those seedlings that you're lost. We're trying to get the law changed so that we can replace seedlings killed by other natural disasters like pests or flooding. One thing you need to know about cost share is it's considered taxable income. And you will receive a 1099 from the state if your cost share is more than $600. If it's not, if it's less than 600, you won't receive a 1099, but however, you need to report it on your income or report it as income on your tax return. And then finally, I'll just quick go over the cost share process for landowners. Like I mentioned, you contact a DNR forester, they visit your land, they develop a project plan. You have to enroll as a state supplier. Once you're told you can complete the work, you do it. The forester verifies that the project is done and you receive your reimbursement. The final thing is who to contact for cost share, and the DNR does have 16 areas that across the state, and one or two, usually just one, but forester is assigned to each area. And then I put on there the link to where you can find the cost share. that is it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was awesome and right on time. So we're going to go ahead and answer questions at the end of the
Okay.
webinar. We've had a couple roll in, so we'll save those for the end. And so I think we'll go ahead and switch over to Callie's presentation now. So thank you so much. So Callie, if you'd like to go ahead and start sharing your screen, you should be able to.
Yeah, let me hit the share button.
Yep,
Oh, got a lot of things going on there.
no worries.
Okay, oh, I should do this from the beginning, I'll make sure everybody can see that all right.
I can't see anything yet.
Oh, okay. Let me do the share again. Aha, there we go. All right, I think that should be
Yep,
able
no,
to see that now. Yeah, okay,
that looks
awesome.
great.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me and to talk about the NRCS programs. I might sound like not a broken record, but not the right term to use, but reiterate a lot of what Jennifer mentioned as far as how our cost share works. It runs a little bit different than the DNR, but some things are similar. Um, so bear with this very blank slide, but I wanted to just get you, not blank, but bare minimum slide. I just wanted to get some of the information out there. So I don't know, I just want to introduce myself first. I'm Callie, I'm the state forester for Minnesota NRCS. We have area foresters and we have a lot of foresters in our field offices now, and we keep hiring more, which is awesome. So if you ever have any questions, you can contact me. If you're familiar with the NRCS office in your local county, you can contact your local county office to get in touch with a forester. Um, so we are a non-regulatory, voluntary technical and financial assistance service. So NRCS is part of the Department of Agriculture. Our funding typically, well, always comes through the Farm Bill. So if you're aware of what happens in Congress with the Farm Bill, that can affect our sign-up periods that we have. It can affect the amount of money that's available to landowners. Um, so you can also contact your local representatives if you want to see more money coming through NRCS. And historically, we've worked with farmers and agricultural producers to help, I guess, promote good conservation on the land. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute, but I'd say like within the last 10 to 15 years, we've moved into considering like forest landowners, farmers, or producers of a sort. So you'll hear that term producers. Um, you see a lot of times where we are, I think initially we were doing a lot of forest management plans for landowners, and that's really shifted into, again, providing more technical and financial assistance based on what we call resource concerns on the land. So it can have anything to do with your soil, water, air, plants, animals, and we've recently added like the human and energy aspect of resource concern. So you'll see that SWAPA plus the HE sometimes when you hear about NRCS. We also have no land acreage minimums. So I think that might be a little bit different than the DNR's program, but that's just part of how Congress has developed that. It's kind of a they like to say non-discrimination, but it's just saying there's no minimums. But you'll find out that when you're managing your land for wildlife or for other forestry, some wildlife practices that we have do have a minimum just because that meets the needs of the specific wildlife we're managing for. Other things that are important to know is that a landowner cannot earn more than $900,000 a year over a 3-year period as an average. So that's usually the only one that really affects our private forest landowners. The other ones have to do with landowners who are farming. It's called like an HEL, so the highly erodible land. You can't be farming highly erodible land to receive cost share assistance or farming in a wetland. So typically that doesn't affect our forest landowners, but they still have to fill out the paperwork for it, as any good governmental agency will have you do. And then I just heard Jennifer talking about this, but any money received as part of cost share is taxable income as well for us. So the landowner will receive a 1099. And, we see that come into play a lot of time with our retired landowners when they don't, that can, depending on the amount of money received, it can affect their income. So it's just something to be aware of. I want to go back and talk about resource concern base. I'm going to just flip to the next slide because even I don't like to look at that blank white slide. So when we talk about those resource concerns, mostly on the forest land, we're talking about the structure and the composition. So that's a plant resource concern, structure and composition of the trees, the health. There's some that have to do with health. There's some that have to do with fire. So, right now, a lot of our landowners up in the Duluth and the Northeast area are experiencing the spruce budworm outbreak, resulting in a high fuel load of the dead fir and spruce trees. And so what that resource concern looks like is more of like a fire hazard resource concern. And that's how we justify the work we do. So if you have someone from a field office come out onto your property to help provide even just technical assistance, that's typically what they're doing, is looking to see like, what is our actual resource concern here? Others that we see commonly could be like a soil erosion issue after potentially if you did have a timber harvest on your property and the logging equipment came through, and if it didn't get reseeded, all of a sudden you've got some soil erosion happening on some bare roads and trails. For wildlife, our field offices, we have what we call wildlife habitat evaluation guides. So you will see, these documents being filled out for us to document that there is some sort of resource concern. I worked for years on the Golden Wing Warbler project, which is also in Minnesota. I was in Wisconsin, but the Golden Wing Warblers have their own specific wildlife habitat evaluation guide that they go through to ensure that there actually is a resource concern here for Golden Wing Warblers. Their habitat isn't adequate, or the potential for habitat is there. So that's what we talk a lot about when we're talking about resource concerns. The environmental, we have two main programs that we provide cost share through. So I'm going to go back and reiterate that you can have our staff come out and just provide technical assistance, just talk about ways that you could improve or solve a resource concern on your property. But you can also receive financial assistance, which means applying for it, meeting the program deadlines for applying. There was just one on Friday. And in developing a conservation plan with the local field staff. So the main one we see is this environmental quality incentives program. It's typically you create a conservation plan to help solve this resource concern. Because there's sometimes limited funds available, then all those applications get ranked against each other, and the ones that there's a whole system for ranking, and the ones that rank higher get funded first. So that means that kind of like their resource concern is a bigger concern and more likely to get funded. So it doesn't really have anything to do with like timing of getting your application in. Like I applied before my neighbor and they got funded before me. It has a lot more to do with what the actual resource concerns are that we're trying to help with. So EQIP is a one-time typically payment that gets paid once the work is completed. And I'm going to go into what our practices are. I heard Jennifer mention practices as well. So I just want to talk to you about what our practices are. And so typically, we have like a forest stand improvement, or you might even just want to get a forest management plan through NRCS. Once those are completed, then you can get paid for them. So that's what we call it, EQIP, but it's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. You can see that how it works. We're working one-on-one with our producers, so either agriculture or forest landowners, to develop that conservation plan. and outline the conservation practices. So sometimes you can do the work yourself, but sometimes you have to hire a contractor or a forester to do it. And I think typically in the past, because we call it a cost share, it could provide financial assistance up to like 50%. And lately we've been funding quite a bit higher, up to sometimes 70 to 90%. It depends on, we have what we call historically underserved landowners. And so those are landowners who are either like beginning farmers or beginning forest landowners. So they've owned their land and been working it for 10 years or less, or they fall within a group of certain groups. I'm not even going to say it right, so I'm not going to try, but historically underserved is typically 3 different, like Hispanic or Pacific Islanders, different underserved groups that then can get a higher cost share rate. So that's called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. The other one that's most common to see our landowners work with is the Conservation Stewardship Program. And when I first started working with NRCS, this was explained to me that there were landowners who were like, hey, I don't have any resource concerns on my property. Like, I'm doing everything as I should be. I don't have like cows in my streams that need to be fenced out. I don't have this forest health issue with all these pests, but I still want to take advantage of these cost share programs. So they developed, this is how it was explained to me, so I hope I'm still explaining it the right way, but the Conservation Stewardship Program was developed. It's changed a lot over the years, but essentially it's a 5-year commitment where you get an annual payment based on your acreage as well as certain practices and enhancements. So it's a lot more, applying for conservation stewardship is a lot more time consuming, and there's still a lot of documentation and work that goes into being a part of the program, because you are going to get a little bit of a higher rate. You gets paid annually after documentation is provided. And you can see here, it encourages land stewards to improve their conservation. So we're not necessarily solving that resource concern, although there may be resource concerns out there. But it's more of like, keep up the good work. Here are additional things you can do. So sometimes we'll see, like we have in forestry, in the forest stand improvement practice, we have what we call enhancements, and some of them have to do with carbon storage and sequestering carbon. So then you can plant trees, or you can manage your trees so that they're on a longer rotation for carbon sequestration. Some of them have to do with bird habitat and improving your forest for songbirds and other species that might be declining in population. So there's a whole bunch of them out there, and they're all on our website, which I'm going to share the website with you as well, but you can go in and see which ones might pique your interest. Sometimes you can just like build bird boxes, or bat boxes, or bluebird boxes, or wood duck boxes if you've got the right habitat for them. And so I know a lot of times people really enjoy doing that. And it helps provide wildlife habitat as well. So our practices, I already mentioned. Oh, I just want to go back and say there are many other programs within NRCS. You've probably heard of some of them, like the Healthy Forest Reserve Program. We have the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is where our partners apply to do projects. So there have been some in the state that in regards to forestry, like I mentioned, the Golden Wing Warbler Project. Healthy Forest Reserve right now that comes from the EPA, the funding for it does. And right now we only are running that as an RCPP. So it gets really confusing. It's a lot more targeted areas. And if you live in one of those areas, you've probably received, mailings from the organizations that are doing that as part of their outreach. So if you're on our website and you're like, man, she didn't talk about all these other programs out there, it's because they typically are, there are much less common programs, and the people who are applying for them, it's targeted. So you'll probably hear about it from a different way. The other thing is CRP. So if you've heard of Conservation Reserve Program, That's run through our sister agency, which is the Farm Service Agency. They follow our practice standards that we have, but they also, now it used to be like, like you would hear about it in grasslands and hayfields and, planting things like that. And then it's an easement program, so you have to keep it in there for many years. But now there is a forestry side of CRP, and it has a lot more to do with tree planting or a little bit to do with forest management. So some people might be involved with CRP in that regard. And like I said, it's an easement program where you also get an annual payment, and it's much longer period of time that you keep the land in that easement. So a lot of our practices, the forest stand improvement and woody residue treatment, those are really common. We do require that you have a forest management plan in place before, prior to planning these. So if you need a plan, you could get one cost shared through NRCS. Otherwise, a lot of times forest stand improvement is designed to address any of the resource concerns outlined in your forest management plan. So if you say your forest is overstocked and mature and in need of a timber harvest, then we have what we call some guidelines under, we have forest stand improvement, but then there's multiple other options under that for implementing on your property. So it might be even age management or uneven age management, or just managing your forest for the forest health and for wildlife. Woody residue treatment then comes alongside that primary practice of forest stand improvement, and it helps with what we call the woody residue that's left after timber harvest or after maybe a wind event. You would want to help clean up that wind event with woody residue treatment, or it's also getting used in the areas where there's pests and disease and forest health issues. Oh, there's where my forest management plan slide went to. So a lot of times our field staff, when they're working with landowners, we want to do what's easiest and what's best for the landowner. And a lot of landowners they're choosing to get the SFIA program through GNR, or to get a forest management plan through the stewardship program, because it's a lot easier. And sometimes if you've worked with NRCS before, you know that it can take a long time to get funded through us. So however a landowner goes about getting a plan, it doesn't really matter to NRCS. We just prefer that there is a plan in place. Back to some of the forestry practices, we have practices that pay as well for tree and shrub establishment, as well as the site prep it takes. Different tree pruning. We have one called access control, which is actually going to keep unwanted animals out of the area, especially where you've planted trees. We do have prescribed burning. We have a prescribed burning practice. I see I didn't list it here, but in conjunction with that are fire breaks and fuel breaks, if that's recommended in your prescribed burn plan. We see it, we'd like to see a lot more people using prescribed burning, but it's one of those less common used practices. Again, if you are going to be implementing some sort of timber harvest, we have forest trails and landings, as well as the closure and treatment of those roads and trails. So that's all in conjunction with that forest stand improvement practice. This is becoming really popular. We also have agroforestry practices, alley cropping, forest farming, silvopasture, and then windbreaks. It just depends on where you're at in the state, but silvopasture is becoming really popular, and that's not grazed woodlands, and it's not just letting your animals in the forest. It's very intentional prescribed grazing where your animals are in the woodlots, maybe to help control invasive species, but also to let them help regenerate the forest floor. So that one is the animals are probably barely in the woods for the entire grazing season. Like I said, it's very intentional. The landowner has to follow a prescribed grazing plan, as well as have a forest management plan in place, so that we're not doing any damage to the trees. Those are becoming more popular because a lot of them have to do with tree planting, and we have a lot of money right now for tree planting and for our climate friendly practices and money that's available through NRCS. So I think I don't know if I'm right on time, but I did we have this really great YouTube video, so I can put the link in the chat, or I can share this presentation where you can go and watch, and it goes through a whole bunch of different it's just this really great YouTube video. We have our landowners who are featured, some of our field staff who are featured, our foresters talking about how they work with private landowners. It explains it from a practical standpoint better than I ever could on this presentation. But just really talks about the process of like getting in touch with the field office, having one of our field staff come out and meet with you, helping to develop that conservation plan, determine your resource concerns, determine what's best for you, which might actually be, like getting cost share through the DNR instead of through NRCS, or whatever works best for the landowner. Everything that we do is based off of landowner goals and objectives. And like I said, it's voluntary, so we don't ever come out without you having invited us first. So yeah, I think that's about it. I think I'll stop sharing and drop that link into the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Callie. That was great.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions that came in, so I'll go ahead and get started with those. So first, I think this one is targeted towards Jennifer, but also I think it's relevant for you, Callie, as well. Are homeowners associations eligible for the cost share programs? Our HOA has several acres of forest and has used goats in the past to manage, they say to manage goats, but I'm guessing to manage the forest, but more help is needed. So our HOA is eligible for cost share.
Yes, as long as what they have would be considered woodlands. So we have cost share for HOAs is like, when I think of HOA, I think of more of where I actually live in a townhouse association, but that's in the city. But if I know there is some that are in wooded areas, so they would be eligible.
Awesome. All right. And then so this was a question. Oh, sorry, Callie, do you want to go ahead and answer that question? If you have a
I
response.
was just gonna say, yeah, they are eligible, but it does, it gets just really tricky when you have like multiple, like you would just want to designate maybe one person to represent the HOA, because each individual person then has to fill out like the forms for, like their income and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. That's a good tip. All right, here's another question. So I think maybe we already covered this when we talked about the eligible practices, but this is asking about the eligible practices listed under the DNR programs, about whether or not those eligible practices are for all the different programs. I'm guessing both state and federal, or if they just apply to DNR.
What we have on our DNR website is what's just eligible through the DNR program. Okay. And I was going to mention that kind of as Callie was talking, just a few things to also about the DNR's cost share program is DNR does not require you to have a forest management plan in order to receive cost share. NRCS usually reimburses at a higher rate than DNR does, but it does take longer to get enrolled into NRCS programs. The DNR no longer cost shares woodland stewardship plans, but some SWCDs do. So I always encourage people to reach out to SWCD to see if they're funding cost share programs. And then Callie mentioned CSP land, conservation stewardship program. Those lands are eligible. If you have CSP land, it can be an SFIA, right? So far, they have not said that CSP land is not eligible.
All right, here's another question. Is it possible to utilize the cost share program with land that is enrolled in 2C?
Yep, so both 2C and SFIA enrolled land can get cost share.
But then you can't be enrolled in both SFIA and 2C at the same time, right?
Not at
one
the
or
same
the other.
time.
Yep.
Yes, but sorry, was that?
Oh no, that was just an additional question that I.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, yeah, you can't we call it double dip.
Yep. All right, those are all the questions in the Q&A. So if people want to keep submitting those, but
The
one,
the
go
other
ahead.
thing I should mention is if someone's getting cost share through NRCS to do, for example, tree planting, we also say you can't come to the DNR and try to also get cost share because that would be double dipping. And so you have to be in one or the other program.
Okay. All right, and Callie, maybe you already answered this question, but how do people find a local NRCS forester or local service provider in their area?
Yeah, I will. It's on you could actually just Google Minnesota NRCS and the website will come up with all our office locations, but I will put the link in the chat as well. So not all of the offices have a forester. Most of them in the Northeast do. There is a forester who represents the Northwest, so that's a big area to cover. And only one in the Southeast. We do have partnerships with NWTF, so the Wild Turkey Federation, with American Bird Conservancy. They have an RCPP, so there are other foresters out there. But I would just go to the website to look at the office, and then they can tell them if there's a forester available.
Great,
And
thank
I'll
you.
put the link in right now.
Thank you. And how often do like NRCS foresters and DNR foresters and SWCD folks, how often do all those different people work together with a landowner? Like, is there a lot of overlap with the services that they provide?
Yeah, I would say, if someone wants to, they reach out to a DNR forester and they feel that the project they want to complete they'd be better suited for NRCS, then they would, make sure that they got that person in touch with NRCS. But regarding their cost share program versus the DNRs.
Yeah, same. It goes the other way too. Like, if we're gauging that a landowner doesn't want to engage with a federal program or our long application and ranking process, then we will recommend them to the DNR. We do have agreements with the SWCDs, especially again in the Northeast. So a lot of their foresters are working. We'll recommend cost share projects NRCS cost share or DNR, again, what's best for the landowner. So I know a lot of times the SWCD foresters will come out with our NRCS because they're co-located in our offices sometimes, but it just depends on the office.
Thank you. All right, here's a question for you, Callie. My neighbor got an NRCS grant to build a greenhouse. Can anyone apply for that?
Sorry, yes, yeah, anybody can apply. They're called the hoop houses. There used to be really much stricter requirements for those. Like you had to be a market gardener or you had to be selling your produce at a market. And I don't think that those are in existence anymore. So it's just, you can just call up your local office again and tell them that you're interested in a hoop house. There of course are again, it can't be on highly erodible land. And I might be used to, you can't plant, you're supposed to plant directly into the soil. So it's not like a greenhouse. You're going directly into the ground with those. But so there are requirements, but again, those should be on the website as well, but your local field office should be able to help you apply for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something I didn't know about, so that's good to know. And we're right at time, so do either of you have any last closing thoughts that you'd like to end with?
Yeah, just wanted to mention SWCDs. Like I said, they had cost share. Some have cost share for woodland stewardship plans, but they also have cost share to do projects in your woods. So I always say, reach out to as many people as you can and find the best fit for you.
Yeah, same. I'm just sorry, I'm putting the links in the chat there. So yeah, I agree with that. You feel what's best for you, what works best for you. The clock is chirping at us if you can hear that. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Jennifer and Callie for presenting today. I'll include both of your contact info in the follow-up email with the recording of today's webinar. So if people have any questions after today, please feel free to follow up. But I hope you both have a great day, and thank you everyone for joining.
Okay, thank
All right,
you.
bye.
Bye.